Hey, this is Chris from Rekkid Talk, and so I'm doing a response video today. This is responding to a video. Maybe it's becoming a thread. We'll see what happens. So there's a fairly new channel called Ricefield Records. So the man's name is Michael. He's an American who has moved to Japan, in the countryside of Japan, and he started making some videos about records and um, I'm kind of interested in seeing where he's going to go from the standpoint of being an American in Japan, um, what sort of local records he might be into, what in terms of American or English or European music that he's finding over there. We'll see how that goes. But this particular video that I'm responding to, he was thinking about um, records that he liked when he was a teenager, then records from that same time period that he's purchased more recently that the kind of stuff he wouldn't have been into as a teenager. His choices were from the 1970s. For me, my entire teenagedom was encompassed in the 1980s. Teenagedom for me started in the year 1982. So we'll start off with stuff I liked as a teenager. So in 1982, I was getting into heavy metal and Iron Maiden, the number of the beast. Man, if you were 13, that was awesome. And Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Quiet Riot and Motley Crue. This stuff was awesome. And the Iron Maiden and the Judas Priest hold up a lot better than those other bands I mentioned. Now, in 1982, I had a turntable. I was already sort of transitioning into the cassette world because you could carry your music around with you. That was way more important to me than sound quality. I had this on cassette during the great heavy metal purge when I was an undergraduate in college. I sold off most of my heavy metal collection to a local record store. Most of my remaining metal was stuff that he didn't want to buy. And he bought all my Iron Maiden, but I've gotten it all back on CD. I actually don't have any Iron Maiden on vinyl. They want way too much for Iron Maiden on vinyl. Then a couple years later, one of the things I did as a teenager was we had a library, and you could check out records from the library. And one of the groups that I was checking records out of was U2. So 1984, I'm about 15, The Unforgettable Fire. This is still my favorite U2 album, even though I might have said War at that time period. So this is the one produced by Eno and Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. This is definitely not quite sounding like Iron Maiden or AC/DC or Van Halen or Def Leppard, but me sort of branching out into not my parents' music. And my parents were pretty young, so I was getting like Beatles, The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, that sort of music from them. But then Iron Maiden was obviously not their music. U2, I think they like U2 more than Iron Maiden. Then 1986, I was getting later in high school, not really crazy about the small town scene, and so we traveled to a town a couple hours away. We were in a mall. They had a proper record store. I heard about this album, so Husker Du, Candy Apple Gray. I'd read about them. They were cool. Never heard a note of their music. Blind bought this on cassette. This is the cassette I bought in either 1986 or 1987. I don't remember exactly whether I got it right when it came out, or it might have been sometime in 87 when I was still in high school. And then recently I picked it up on vinyl, of course, because I'm a middle-aged guy who can buy records for himself now. So there it is. Um, and Husker Du has been a band that I've really liked throughout the years. And I rate Candy Apple Gray a lot higher than most of your Husker Du fans. It's generally considered to be one of the lesser albums in the catalog. All right. So music I didn't like in the 1980s when I was a teenager. I can basically break it into three genres of varying intensities of dislike that I now, as an adult, like. It would be jazz, country, and pop. And I'll admit, jazz was basically indifference on my standpoint. I know my parents had like a Miles Davis record or two. They had Herbie Hancock Headhunters, but they weren't big jazz heads. So there weren't a lot of jazz records around. My friends didn't listen to jazz. And so this is an album from 1982. Earl Klugh and Bob James, two of a kind of cool jazz. And even at this point in my life, I don't actually have a lot of 1980s jazz in my collection. I've got a lot more of the standard stuff from the 50s, 60s, 70s, the kind of stuff that people tend to collect. But there you go. I've gone from being indifferent to being at least a casual jazz fan. When I was a teenager, I would have told you that country music totally sucked. I hated country music completely, unconditionally as a teenager. And so in 1983, I never would have bought this single, Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, Islands in the Stream. Never would have bought a Kenny Rogers record. Never would have bought a Dolly Parton record. I would have told you this sucks, this is terrible. If you had told 14-year-old me that I would own this record one day, I would have laughed at you and told you you were full of shit. But there it is. And then pop music. Now this is hate, but it's more conditional than unconditional, because even in the 80s, there was some stuff I listened to. I had a Pet Shop Boys tape. I had a George Michael. I got into Depeche Mode in college because of a girl who was really into Depeche Mode. But generally, your synth pop, the more pop side, I mean, you heard that stuff on the radio, you saw that stuff on MTV, so it was pretty ubiquitous. It wasn't like jazz, where I basically just didn't hear jazz because I wasn't searching it out, and you'd have to have been searching it out. And so the record I'm choosing to show is from 1985, so it would have been 16, Fine Young Cannibals. So sort of synth poppy, of course, with sort of a soul influence, which would have been another style of music that teenage me did not appreciate the way I do now. So there you go, Michael. There's some stuff that I like now that I just didn't appreciate back in 1983, 1984, because I was kind of a knucklehead then. So hopefully maybe other people will jump on this.